Part 2. "Look," Carlos said to his friend Dillim. "There she is." Dillim had to climb on top of a boulder to see the surrounding long grass, but he was rewarded with his first ever sight of Princess Belena. She was standing with her back to them, clad in fine leather armor, her long hair forming a cascade down her back. She was busy shooting arrows at a target painted on one of the giant trees, and Dillim could see several of those immense bolts planted in the ground, not far from him. They both agreed that a closer look was necessary. Carlos' family had come to Vandan from one of the kingdoms to the west of Elgon several years ago. He'd had to leave a lot behind, including all of his friends, for which a young boy hadn't been easy. But he was grown up now, and his boyhood friend Dillim had arrived in Rismark just yesterday, along with his family. Even greater numbers of people had come seeking Valerie's protection and the bounty on her lands, and several more settlements had sprung up around her castle. At the moment, however, Dillim was less concerned with starting a new life, and more interested in seeing one of the giantesses. It was apparently all he could talk about, so Carlo, who knew a bit about Belina's habits, had taken him here, amongst the 1,000-foot-high trees that grew south of the castle. The young men crept through the grass, invisible to the giant princess towering above them. Carlo kept thinking of what would happen if she did see them, while his friend could only gape at the giantess's gorgeous figure, all the while wishing he could climb it. They reached the spot where she stuck her arrows into the ground, where Dillim suddenly got a crazy idea. "I'll climb up one of the arrows," he said excitedly. "Then when she picks it up, I can climb onto her hand, and then onto her shoulder." "That's foolish, Dillim. She'll spot you, and then she'll spot me, and we'll both be in trouble." "Oh, come on, we're not little boys anymore, you coward. If she does see me, I'll simply tell her that I'm lost, and I need her help. And oh, by the way, how I think that she's the most beautiful girl I've ever seen, and how it would mean a lot if she could give me a kiss." Yeah, like that will ever turn out well." "Well, go on then. She's almost done with her archery practice." Dillim crept over to the arrow furthest from Bolina and jumped up to grab a hold of it. The shaft was about 16 inches in diameter, and he wasn't the fittest man, so climbing it proved arduous. He was just about to give up and climb back down when he felt a sudden lurch and nearly let go. The next moment, he was soaring through the air, holding onto the arrow shaft for dear life, as the unaware giantess made ready to take her final practice shot for the day. Bellina fitted the arrow into her bow and drew back the string. She had seen the tiny intruder, so she wasn't really planning to let the arrow fly, but she wanted to see how the little man would react. And, to her amusement, although she didn't show it, he began to scream and shout, loudly to catch her attention. Letting loose a laugh, she plucked him from his precarious position on the arrow's tip and dropped him into her gloved hand. He was quite clearly a new arrival, because he lay down flat on his stomach, face buried in the leather, his legs stretched nearly to the base of her fingers. Only now did she feel a little guilty. Then, a second later, not anymore. "Still want that kiss?" she asked sweetly. "Or has the moment passed?" Dillim looked up at her, as his heart nearly freezing and his face deep red. You heard me?" he whimpered. She laughed again as she stooped to pick up his equally flustered companion. "My ears may look a long way off from down there," she said, "but believe me, my hearing is quite good." Carlo swallowed hard. This was his first time in the princess's hand, too, and he had no idea what the proper etiquette for such a situation might be. He began to babble an apology. Then Bellina shushed him. "It's not a crime to approach me, you know," she said, brushing a strand of hair from in front of her turquoise eyes. "I've been trying to become friendly with the people in Rismark, and the other towns as well. But even after 6 years, it seems I'm just still too frightening to even talk to." "Pity. And they say I'm such a pretty girl, too." She winked at Dillam, and he blushed again. A fortnight shy of her 18th birthday, she was indeed very beautiful, even more so than her mother, some said. She was definitely taller than Valerie, standing 175 feet tall barefoot, and most men would have agreed that she was one of the most stunning girls they had ever seen. If she were of normal size, that is. Bolina sometimes wondered at the strange position she and Valden found themselves in. He only wanted to be a giant, so that his family and everyone else would look up to him, while she wished she were human-sized like him, so that she could get a boy to fall in love with her. The two young men in her hand, each no bigger than her thumb, were staring up at her with obvious lust, but she didn't think either of them would want a long-term relationship with her. "I'd best be heading home," she said, gathering up her archery equipment. "I'll drop you fellows off at the town gates. Then, I think I'll have a relaxing swim in the river, perhaps. I don't really like archery, you know. It's more a Sylvie and Valden's thing. But Mother's orders, so what can I do?" Dillam watched her luscious lips moving as she talked, hoping that she might remember that kiss she promised. But she didn't seem interested anymore, and he didn't dare ask. A peasant doesn't ask such a thing of a princess, no matter how nice she might appear to be. Soon after, she put them down just inside Rismark's main gate, and they watched her head towards the castle, wondering if she'll ever talk to them again. After a quick swim and a change of clothing, Bellina ran into Sylvie, who had just finished her school lessons for the day. The girls in Valden had a private tutor, an old man named Elgon, who had once been their father's teacher as well. When he was done for the day, one of the girls would carry him back to his residence in Rismark, since he was too old to walk such a distance twice a day. Sylvie was 14 now, 160 feet tall, and didn't consider herself a child anymore. But as Bellina knew well, she could still behave in a very childish manner every now and then, especially towards her brother Valden. Valden wasn't at home right now, though. He was staying at the castle in Elgon, after he had begged his father not to force him to live here any longer. While King Alban had agreed, the queen had been very upset, mostly at her youngest daughter for all of the things she had done to Valden. Sylvie had been upset as well, but that was several years ago, and she had returned to her old self soon enough. In place of Valden, she had found other children in the town who were willing to be her friends, though she had to promise her mother that she would treat them with much more decorum than she had treated her brother. She'd kept her promise, for the most part, and of course there were many young girls in Rismark who loved spending time with their princess, even if their different sizes did make things a bit awkward at times. As it happened, Sylvie had just heard from her mother that Valden would be returning home in a few days. The girls hadn't seen him since last year, when they went to visit their father and him in Elgon, a week's journey by foot from Vandan and deep in the lands of the humans. Whenever the sisters visited any of those parts, they never stayed long, simply because there were no places where they could stay, apart from sleeping on the ground. "Do you think he'll be glad to see us again?" Sylvie asked, smiling happily. "He was so sick last year, and we never got a chance to talk to him properly." "He wasn't feeling sick. He just didn't want to spend any time with you, little sister. But then who can blame him?" "Oh, shut up. I think he'll be delighted to be back. Him and Dad both. And Mom, too. She's really missed them, I think. Anyway, I'd best be taking Master Elgon back home, or else Mommy will give me another talk." She made a distasteful expression with her face. "By the way, your little roommate wants to talk to you. She sounded rather anxious. Maybe you ought to go right now." Bellina's best friend, Arily, was grown up now as well, and living with Bellina at the castle. In a doll's house in her room, in fact. She had almost forgotten her previous existence as an orphan on the streets of the town's poor district, and was living a very comfortable and happy life in the company of her giant friend. Lately, however, she and Bolina had been spending much less time with each other. Arily seemed to prefer being amongst the common folk more than she did living in a giant palace, and she was usually seen only at mealtimes. Bellina entered her magnificent bedroom, large enough for dozens of human-sized houses to be built within its walls. In one corner stood her old dollhouse, a human-scale replica of a 4-story villa. Only a few mansions in the kingdom could match its size and splendor, and it was as richly furnished as any of the rooms in the castle itself. She knelt down next to it and carefully removed the detachable roof. Aurelie, wearing a dress just as fine as Bellina's own, was lying on her bed, in one of the upstairs bedrooms, and she sat up as Bellina picked her and the bed up and placed them on her bedside table. "What's up?" Bellina asked, still kneeling so that she and Arily were at each other's eye level. "I heard you wanted to talk to me. It's not often that happens anymore." "I'm sorry," Arily said, rather despondently, Bellina thought. "It's just, well, there have been some changes in my life recently. I guess you know what I'm talking about." "It's Riker, isn't it?" Bellina's gaze and voice made Aurelie a little uneasy. "Oh yes, I know about you two." "Then you know that I love him, Bellina, and that I want to be with him. Go and live with him, I mean, in Rismark." "So you want to leave?" "Well, yes, but if you're going to be upset about it, who said I was upset?" "Oh, come on, it's so easy to see when you're upset." Arily raised her voice, but she still felt insignificant before the giant princess. "It almost never happens, but I can tell you're very upset right now." "Well, I'm not the one shouting, am I?" Bellina said, raising her own voice. "So tell me, why can't your boyfriend come and stay here with us? Or do you no longer need someone like me around, someone who gave you everything and only wished to be your friend?" "When you fall in love, you'll understand why." "Not that that's going to happen anytime soon." Before Aurelie knew what to say next, Bellina's giant hand had lifted her up, still sitting on her bed, and brought her up to her face. She could easily crush the bed in one hand, Aurelie knew, and her along with it. But she didn't. She simply put Aurelie down on the floor and turned her head away. Aurelie got up, walked over to her friend, and climbed up the slope of her knees and into her lap. She sat down just below Bellina's hips, a minuscule figure beneath a towering cliff of the princess's body. "I'm sorry I said that," she whispered. "I don't know why. I was just so angry, I guess. You were right, though. I do owe you everything. Everything that I have and more. You've been the best friend I could ever have, and you know that. But I really do love Riker, and I want to marry him and share my life with him, even if he is just a farmer's son. He wouldn't be able to live here, Bolina. It's too grand for his taste. And while I would love to keep on living here with you, well, I'm a grown woman now. And we all have to move on sometime." When Bellina looked down at her, Arily was shocked to see tears flowing down her face. Giant fingers encircled her and gently and delicately lifted her up. Then she was up there, right next to Bellina's face, and the waterfall of tears was pouring over her. Arily didn't know what to say, so she simply pressed herself against Bellina's cheek. "I'm so jealous of you," Bellina said, her voice barely overcoming her sobs. "The one thing I want, the one thing that would make me truly happy, and you found it. But I'm acting like a selfish child. I ought to be happy for you. I am happy for you, but I don't want to lose you. You mean so much to me, Arily, and I don't want you to leave. You mean a lot to me too, my princess, and I wouldn't want to lose you either. Will you promise that you'll come and visit us? That you'll still be there for me? I know Riker and his folks are still so frightened of you, but he doesn't know you like I do. No one knows me like you do, Bellina said, managing a smile. Of course I'll come and visit you, as often as I can. But first, promise me one thing. Anything, Your Highness. When you get married, I would like to be your maid of honor, and I would be honored if you would marry here, in the palace, so that everyone could see how much your happiness means to me. Arily was stunned by what she heard, and there was no possible way she could refuse. Bolina lay down on her bed, placing the tiny woman comfortably on her chest. They talked for hours, mostly about the preparations for Arily's wedding, even though that was still a long way off. Bellina also couldn't help wondering if she herself would ever get married. Of course I will, she told herself when she was alone. Mom and Dad found each other, and they couldn't have been more different at the beginning. I will find my prince someday, but not if I just lie here and feel sorry for myself all the time. I am a princess of Vandan, and if there's one thing I'm not going to do, it's give up, no matter how long it takes. I will find my true love and live happily ever after, just like the princesses in all the old tales. She didn't know it yet, but her dreams were about to come true, though not at all in the way she'd expected them to. Prince Valden sat next to his father in the palm of his mom's hand. He got onto hands and knees and looked down at the view stretching out below him. Even though Valerie was holding them at waist level, they were still able to look out over the rooftops of the city of Rismark. In the 6 years that Alban and his son were away, this place had grown great in size and population, and it was now amongst the larger cities of the entire region. It was because of this that Alban had felt he needed to move back, or so he told everyone. The real reason had been he'd missed his wife too much, and he didn't want their time together to be limited to her short and infrequent visits to Elgon. 16-year-old Valden had been less willing to return, however, even though he'd missed his mother as well. There were just too many bad memories of his time in Sylvie's company. He could only hope and pray that she hadn't told anyone of how she treated him. But he'd been too worried, it turned out. Sylvie was a lot more grown up now. She was almost as tall as her mother, and when she greeted him, she'd almost shown him the respect he deserved as a prince, and as her older brother. He in turn hadn't brought up bygones whenever they were talking, yet he still couldn't see any future for himself as long as he stayed here. Certainly not any future he'd like to have. It's wonderful to be back, Alban said. He was now reclining on Valerie's fingers and was running his hands across the band of her giant gold wedding ring. Don't you think so too, Valden? I suppose, came the not-so-enthusiastic reply. Not really much to do here, though. But then, you don't want me to go off on my own. He drifted off into silence, and Alban looked up at his wife with a resigned expression. Valerie giggled. Just like you at that age, isn't he? She said, winking. Valden, darling, if you're not happy staying here, you need only tell us. It breaks my heart seeing you so miserable, or to think that we're keeping you here against your will. Oh, give it a rest, my love, Alban said. Our son is just being his usual moody self. Tomorrow he'll be feeling as happy and lively as can be. Valerie had walked some distance into the forest, away from all the settlements, and had reached a small clearing. She sat down on the long grass, as green as the gown she was wearing, and let her husband and son disembark her hand and settle down on her knee. While Alban seemed content to lie down in her lap, in the folds of the skirt between her thighs, Valden kept pacing in circles on top of her knee. "Did you mean what you said, Mom?" he asked, facing Valerie. "Would you really allow me to leave? If I don't want to stay?" "Well,
No," Alban interrupted, getting to his feet. "No, we won't. Not until you're older. And then only if you promise to stay within the boundaries of our kingdom. I won't have you running off thoughtlessly into the wilderness like...
Like you?" Valden replied sharply.
Like when you went off deep into the lands of the goblins to look for all those legendary riches? That was different. I had companions who went with me, skilled warriors and loyal friends, and we knew how to handle and deal with the dangers that lay before us. You just want to run away because you can't get along with your sisters, when instead you should be spending your time with them, sorting out your differences. I don't want to spend time with Sylvie. She's just pretending to be nice to me and all. Mother, you said I could leave if I wanted to. Valden, you're acting like a child. Stop it. Both of you stop it, Valerie shouted, louder than she'd meant to, but it got the job done. She sighed. She also thought Valden needed to grow up a bit, but perhaps that meant letting him make his own decisions from now on. She held out her hand for her son to climb into. "So, you want to go off on your own, is that it?" "Well, while I don't think it's a particularly good notion, I do believe that each of us has the right to follow our own path. If I hadn't rebelled against my parents and refused to harm humans, I wouldn't be alive today, and I certainly wouldn't have found such a loving husband and raised my own family. Your father may not approve, but if it were up to me, I'd let you leave whenever you wish to." You're serious?" Alban exclaimed from the perch on her knee. "That's ridiculous. You send him off on his own and he'll end up either dead from starvation or in the hands of whatever beasts may lurk out there." "Oh, he's not going off by himself," she reassured him. "I happen to have someone in mind, someone I can trust to look after our only son, to keep him safe, as it were." "Who?" Valden cried out. He was standing right on the edge of her hand, as if he couldn't wait to jump off. "Is it a knight? A company of knights? Will they follow me wherever I wanted to go?" "None of those, in fact," Valerie smiled. "No, I was actually thinking of your little sister, Sylvie." Valden was so shocked that he missed a step, slipped, and fell off, only to land in her hand. Laughing, Valerie placed him on her shoulder, where he just sat, not saying a word. "Shall we go home?" she suggested. "I'll make us a grand dinner, and you can ask Sylvie what she thinks of this idea, though I'm sure she'll be as delighted as you are." Meanwhile, in another part of the forest, Princess Belena, who had long forgotten about the story she was reading, was daydreaming. Her 18th birthday, Aurelie wedding, the next few weeks promised to be quite eventful. She wondered if anything else might happen thereafter, her being crowned queen, perhaps? Mother had spoken often about the subject during the previous weeks, but Bolina couldn't imagine the great Queen Valerie abdicating in favor of her daughter anytime soon. The people loved their queen, and most of them still knew little to nothing about Bolina, and she herself didn't think she was ready for such responsibility yet. "But I'm all grown up now," she said to herself. "I don't want to waste my time reading books and learning archery and tending to the gardens anymore. Oh, gods, I wish I could just shrink down to normal size, find a wonderful, loving husband, and be as happy as Arily. I'd give away all of my royal privileges, all that I have, if the man of my dreams would just come and fall into my lap, right now." Deciding that it was past time, she headed home and helped her mother with making dinner. She yawned, stretched her arms and back, preparing to get up and leave. As she did, though,
The tree she was reclining against gave a slight wobble. It was only a tree from the human lands, though quite a large one. She then heard a startled cry above her in the branches, and then, in her utter amazement, a tiny man fell out of the blue and landed in the plop right in the center of her breasts. For a few seconds she could only stare, frozen in place, before deciding to help him get out of her cleavage. Prying him out with her finger, she brought him up to her eyes and saw that it wasn't a man, merely a boy, a few years younger than her. Judging by his unkempt hair and unwashed attire, he was one of the poor folk of the city. These were generally the people who mistrusted her and her family the most. While she hadn't as yet managed to endear herself to the city's needy, Bellina did help her mother out whenever she could to try to make their lives better. The boy was hanging onto her fingertip with both arms, trying futilely to get his legs up as well. She then set him down on top of her book and watched with amusement as he tried to find a way down, while seemingly on the verge of bursting into tears. "Nope. You're not getting away that easily, you little pipsqueak," she said mischievously. "I'm afraid I'll have to take you back with me, as a prisoner. You do know that spying on a royal princess without her being aware of it is a criminal offense, don't you?" I wasn't spying," he cried, falling to his knees and clasping his hands together. I always come here." "So do I. Extraordinary coincidence, isn't it?" He didn't answer. He merely lowered his head and resigned himself to his fate. "Oh, I was just teasing you," she admitted, not wanting to see him cry, which he looked ready to do. "Just for fun, you know? Goodness knows I have a little fun in my life right now. What's your name?" "Lorek, Your Highness," he mumbled. I live in Rismark." "Of course you do. Care for a ride home?" No, that's not necessary. He fumbled for the correct words and looked so awkward that Bellina had to laugh. This was how most of the commoners she'd met had behaved in her presence. Most of them saw her as some sort of goddess-like figure who wouldn't hesitate to squish him if they so much as uttered the wrong word. This boy in particular seemed to be mortally afraid of her, so she decided on the spot to linger a little while and have some fun with him. She gripped him lightly by the waist and could feel his skinny body trembling between her fingertips. Then she tilted her head backwards and placed him on top of her nose, between her eyes. Lorek squirmed and scrambled, desperate not to fall off and land somewhere even more uncomfortable. He glanced sideways and saw a giant sea-green eye, the size of a large barrel, watching him intently. Mesmerized, he tried to reach out and touch her eyelashes, only to lose his hold and slip. He fell off her nose and landed on the soft cheek, and fell away into an empty space, screaming. Next thing he knew, he was back in her hand, only to be brought up to her face again. This time, she brought him right before her lips, and when she spoke, her warm breath blew through his hair. "That wasn't very nice of me, was it?" her lips said, the only part of her he could see from this close. "I'll make it up to you, though. Just relax and enjoy." Relax was the last thing on Lorek's mind. But once her exquisite lips began enveloping his body, there was nothing else he could do. He was powerless against the force of her kiss. The seconds seemed to stretch on forever, as he felt the tip of her tongue prodding him, while he himself nearly got sucked into her mouth. When she broke off, he barely had time to compose himself, before she set him down hastily on the ground and walked off. "Oh dear, what have I done?" Bellina thought, thoroughly embarrassed by her actions. "How could I go and just kiss a peasant boy like that? What will Mom and Dad think when they find out? And that poor boy, he must be terrified out of his wits.
Just because I was so damn desperate to have my first kiss? Now, well, I suppose I'd best go and apologize to him and beg him not to tell anyone.
Lorek watched as the princess turned around and advanced on him until she stood before him, looming mountainous in her blue dress and sandals. He felt like a tiny worm before her feet, and he wondered what she had in store for him now. From Bellina's viewpoint, the tiny figure at her feet was barely visible, but she didn't want to stoop or pick him up, fearing that it would upset him even more. She lowered her head until she was staring down at her chest, and spoke in a tone that clearly showed how mortified she was.
"Forgive me," she said. "I should never have done that, Lorek, and I'm sorry if I hurt you or embarrassed you or anything like that. You see, well, you'll probably think I'm totally pathetic, but I've never kissed a boy before, and you were right there in my hand, and I just couldn't stop myself. Please don't tell anyone, I beg of you. I'll give you whatever you want, money, jewels, anything. Just please don't tell anyone what I did, all right? I won't do it again, I swear."
After an uncomfortably long silence, she finally heard a faint voice from the ground below her.
I won't tell anyone, Your Highness." "Oh, thank you," she burst out, falling to her knees and scooping him up in delight. She very nearly kissed him again, but she gathered hold of herself just in time. Instead, she simply squeezed his body gently, before putting him down for good this time. He was by this point completely flummoxed, and though he wished he could simply leave, he didn't dare do so. To his relief, and Bellina's as well, a man on horseback came riding up at that moment. She recognized the rider as Satos, a servant of her father's. He dismounted, ignored the peasant boy standing nearby, and went straight to the feet of the princess. "Good morning, my lady," he said politely. "Forgive my intrusion, but the king wishes you to return to the palace at once. A very important message has just arrived, or so I've been told." "A message? For me?" She wondered what on earth it might be and who it was from. "Yes, my lady. I'm sorry, but that's all I know." "Very well. I'll be off then. Oh, and Satos, would you mind taking this boy back to his home in Rismark? He's quite away from here, and his parents must be worried about him by now." "They're not," Lorek objected, but he fell silent when he saw her gazing at him. Thinking it is wise not to start an argument, he climbed behind Satos on his horse and was soon being taken off in the direction of the town. Bellina watched them leave, glad to have made a new friend, of sorts. She wondered what Sylvie would say if she told her she actually kissed a boy today, but she was more eager to learn about what the message was. So she gathered her books and began walking back home.